2, 1.
Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of Topical Talkology, and I'm here with both Theo.
Good morning everyone, and
Aline. And Aline, actually tell us a little bit about yourself, because you've got I know you do a lot of research and you do a lot of public speaking on mindset. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what you cover?
So mainly what I'm looking at from a mindset perspective is finding out what people's blocks are and what's possible for them. So it's usually what things in their mind that get in the way, which is usually 70% of thoughts in their mind, and finding out how we can almost eliminate that so that their thoughts are in alignment with their actions. They tend to get better results, or at least take more action and get the results over time.
Because thank you for that, because one of the interesting things I actually wanted to bring up is because particularly in the market landscape that we're heading towards, all these future of work reports have suggested that we're going towards more entrepreneurial type jobs. We're going into this thing called the gig generation. My daughter calls it the hustle generation. But ultimately what's going to happen is we're all going to have, there's no certainty in the job market anymore. Those days are long gone, and I actually had to even say to my daughter the other day, actually, you've got to get comfortable with uncertainty, because that's the way the life is going. But what worries me on the flip side of that is when I see what they do in schools and things like that. They're so busy to actually, they're looking to empower children, which is great. But on the other hand, they don't actually teach them how to actually deal with those pressures of uncertainty in a landscape that is becoming more, I wouldn't say toxic's the wrong word, but more uncertain by the day, because no one really knows what's happening. And even the school environment is teaching children how to prepare for the future of work, when they in themselves have no idea what's actually going on, what's going to happen either. So, I'll throw this out to the floor for you two. Any suggestions? Am I right? Am I wrong?
I think what you're talking about is the snowflake scenario, isn't it? Where, because you've talked about this many times before, where schools are terrified of offending or causing any kind of anxiety. And in fact, that's even gone on to university campuses now, where teachers are not allowed to, they're not allowed to criticise their pupils in certain ways, if you remember, which is very interesting. And I think they're also not allowed to, some places even banned clapping, just in case it frightens people.
That is true. I forgot about that one. But it's one thing I've always said, and you've probably heard me saying in the past, that people who are easily offended will very rarely succeed, because if you can't actually handle offence even on the ground level, how are you ever going to handle it when you actually get more famous? Because, compare yourself to someone like Donald Trump, who decided to put himself for president. So whether you like him or not, there's certain pros and certain lots of cons to him as well. But the thing is, he didn't really need to go for that. Why would you want to deal with that level of crap?
He's got to hide the thick of the earth's crust, doesn't he?
Yeah, but the thing is, you see, he has to take offence every single day. And there's people who are offended by the most menial things, and you wonder why they never get ahead. It's one of my reasons. We've got to develop a thick skin, and also really looks back to what's uncertainty as well.
It's more of a Western phenomenon, isn't it? It's more of a Western phenomenon, because remember I said one of my Russian patients said she just couldn't believe when she came to the UK at the excuses people had for dysfunctioning.
Because?
Well, just that the slightest excuse, people would suddenly say, I'm ill,
that's right,
I'm offended, I'm anxious.
What was her rationale behind that? Because
right. Well, she said, we come from in Russia, because we were talking about her source of strength, and I said, you've got your cult, you've got your religion, you've got your culture, you're very family orientated. She said, well, we're not really religious, we're not really family orientated, but our identity is one of survival. We expect to survive. We're strong. We expect to be strong and to survive. Whereas when you come here, people are weak, and they don't expect to be strong and survive. They are offended, they collapse easily, they stop functioning, they go off sick.
And before I bring this young fellow in at all, it's an interesting one, because Western culture does have a habit of doing that.
And can I just say
jump in, go ahead.
That the key thing that she put her finger on was identity. You see that in the UK, in the West, people are losing their identity. her identity is what gave her strength.
Well, but what's interesting, and you see that particularly with a lot of Indian and Asian families who came over in the 70s after the Idi Amin sort of era. They came in here, and the thing is, they all had this very strong work ethic, and they worked really hard. But as soon as you got your second, third generation children who seem to absorb into very much our Western culture, they're not performing as well. They're not performing as well in school because they sort of become, well, you call it a product of their environment as such. And right now we're seeing that with a lot of the Poles, or Eastern Europeans who are coming over, who would have again that very strong work ethic. So for coming to the UK, our streets are paved with gold, and they've just grasped every single opportunity that they can, while everyone else is whinging around, is saying actually we can't get the jobs because they're coming over. And the reason is because they're not prepared to actually raise their bar or their standard to actually do the jobs that that other people are prepared to take to get themselves ahead. What do you think about that?
And just to add into that, there's an American study based on Italian immigrants back in the 1930s who were found to have the lowest incidence of heart disease in the US, and they discovered that it was purely because of their cultural values. It wasn't because they're eating better or exercising more. They simply had very strong family values, and 3 generations lived in the same house. And once they became more Americanized, they lost the entire benefit to their mental and physical health. So again, the more they went native, then the more unhealthy they became, similar to what you just said here.
It comes down to environment is actually greater than will, isn't it? So anyway, what do you... jump in there. Because,
go for it. Yeah, so I think it's quite interesting because most of the teachers that will be teaching students to be prepared for a future perhaps of uncertainty are probably built up on a system where in their mind there is some sort of certainty. At some point there was a pension that was actually going to do something for them, but now suddenly in that environment of uncertainty they just grasp at certainty being in that teaching role, which is obviously the regular income coming in each month and basically mainly following the system of what they have to teach, rather than perhaps entrepreneurships, which isn't necessarily taught in schools because they're not really entrepreneurs, are they?
Actually, they're not. And actually, you bring up a very good point, because a lot of teachers in schools, and in this case, of private schools as well, you'll find that the majority of them are very much, because teaching is a vocational type job with a lot, and there is sort of an element of certainty attached to that. But you tend to it tends to attract a lot of left-wing thinkers, or even socialistic type thinkers, which is not really an entrepreneurial type environment. I mean, that is more of a right-wing sort of phenomenon, if you want to call it, is because you've got the choice, you've got the ability to go and do whatever you actually want to do and create a life, and you can be able to do that, which is very much what capitalism is. But saying that, I wanted to ask you a question. How old are you? You're 30? 35. You're 35. So the question I want to ask you, is it worth actually going to university now and coming out with 50 grand worth of debt? And is that the investment we should actually go for?
It's interesting because that's probably obviously a black and white question. I did go to university myself, but I think the main thing is what is the purpose behind going to university? What is the end goal? I see a lot of people going out, a bit of confusion. They go to their career advisor and they go, maybe you should do that. And they go and follow that advice, but maybe they shouldn't do that, because what is it they want to achieve as a result? I was listening to Gary Vaynerchuk, who was asked a very similar question: should people go into university? And he said, from his perspective, no. If you're looking to do basically getting involved in entrepreneurship, probably not. But there is a few obviously entrepreneurial-based qualifications, you could say. But the vast majority, if you look 5-7 years down the line, 80 to 90% of them are working for companies.
But what's really interesting is that Gary Vaynerchuk, to use his full name, I mean, he's actually the author of a book called Pitch It, and just to give you a quick background, because he actually did go to university, I believe. He went to university, but he's almost like the social media phenomenon now. But he took his father's liquor business in New Jersey and turned it from a $6 million a year turnover to like $60 million a year turnover, just by basically doing YouTube videos of testing the wine out, which should have totally made him into an alcoholic, actually, probably the amount of video. I think he did over 1,000, but he did over 1,000 at the right over the right time, and he was quite consistent with it. That eventually actually led to that. If you've ever read the book called The Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell, there was a point where actually he reached a tipping point, and actually that's how he became famous. And that it was all, for him, it was all about consistency and everything. So did his degree probably didn't do anything for him in that respect, other than give him a certain level of structure. But do we go to university just for the education, or do we go to university also for the connections?
Well, the thing is, university is university sometimes is simply the key. It's the gateway. So, for instance, when you study medicine and you qualify, and you just come out of 5 or 6 years of intense learning, you think that you realise that when you're a junior doctor, hardly anything you've done is actually relevant to the clinical practice of medicine, and that a nurse knows more than you. But the only difference between you and a nurse is sheer brain power, on average, because there will be exceptions.
What do you mean?
It's not even common sense. Most doctors will have to be more intelligent than the average nurse. Not always, but most. And therefore, and also a lack of anxiety. So a lot of nurses tend to be quite anxious or rule-ridden, and that's the only difference. So a lot of these university for some, and law as well, I'm sure the same lawyers will say the same thing. For instance, when you do a 1-year conversion course, I'm sure that everything you learn in that year is not really going to prepare you for law. But then you have to do your articles, don't you?
But to be a total sort of radical here, why do you actually need to actually go and become a lawyer to actually represent someone in court? Because let's face it, if you're willing to go to court these days and you can represent yourself, which is what you're allowed to do, why can't someone else represent you by just Googling the information?
You can't do it. It's the same with medicine. You do need the experience. You need the
but who created medicine? Who created the medical authority? Because that goes back to the days of Andrew Carnegie and Rockefeller.
Let me give you an example. When
control it,
you learn to become a doctor as a junior doctor. And as a junior doctor, you work endless hours. In fact, they've stopped doing that so much. But when I was a junior, you could work endless hours. You could work 3-day weekends where you start on a Friday morning and finish on a Friday evening, and you're still working in the week.
That's an entrepreneur lifestyle, isn't it?
So what it is endless practice, and then you choose the speciality you want to work in. And then you start studying for that speciality endlessly, with exams that are enormously difficult to pass. Those are professional exams, those are membership exams. And again, those are gateway exams because they're far more difficult than actually, they're far more difficult than is justified by the practice of your medicine. So for professions, university is a gateway entry into that profession. And it gives you the right to start practicing it.
I mean, I'm not denying that, because I did my university. I went to university a very different way. I mean, I did it at evening classes, living on a diet of Pro Plus and black coffee, just to keep me awake through, in between work and actually doing assignments. So I'm not against university. Sometimes I wish my daughter had gone, but she's in this era where she believes that actually, why am I going to get myself £50,000 in debt? And does that justify me having to go to university? Because ultimately she's going to have that hanging over her head. Because let's face it, government system ideally actually wants us to be in debt. It wants us to pay taxes on a regular basis. It wants us to get a job, and that's what education really was from the Industrial Revolution. Even people working in the city are white-collar factory workers, if you really want to call it that, are they not?
Well, that's what university was there for. It was really to train people to cope with the technology of the industrial age. That's all it was. I mean, factory workers would never go to university.
So let me ask you this question. I said, has university benefited you?
I would say so, actually. I know on one level you said about the connections. On another level, it has regards to knowledge and being able to go into profession, although I'm not technically in that profession, which would have been a sports therapist at the time.